across the wide Missouri.
The children used to ride their bikes down to the river, the Missouri River, and they spent a lot of time getting muddy and having a good time fishing and hunting, and they just have always loved the outdoors.
I suppose the very beginning part of this was probably in childhood, when we used to spend a lot of time at the river, fishing and hunting. The river always had an ability to entertain us.
When our kids were small and adventuresome, that was a wonderful place to go. Well, we've been in the refrigeration business for some 40 years, and of course Dave and Greg both were in that with me. It's just a family business.
We meet hundreds of people every year, running service calls around the Kansas City Independence area. And it was on one of those service calls that my brother met an older gentleman that was in his own right a treasure hunter.
The background, I suppose, was that I was interested in river history. And one day I happened to come across a guy that was also interested in the same kinds of things, but he was looking for steamboats.
Yeah, just an old character. Yeah, I'm not even sure I remember his name, but he dressed in black from head to toe, and I think he had dreamed about finding treasure in any format. And my brother that very day brought that story back to our families.
Well, one of his sons came in one day at lunch at my restaurant and said, "I've just met a gentleman that's looking for treasure on the Missouri River."
There's just nothing better, there's nothing more adventurous and more exciting than someone finding buried treasure. Something that has been lost for a long, long time.
Around the table with Jerry Mackey, my father Bob, myself, we began to talk about the possibility of what this meant. And we knew that if this story was true, based on our earlier experience with the river, having it been narrowed from the Corps of Engineers works and the meandering channel altered drastically from its original channel in the 1800s, it just made sense to us that many of those steamboats may no longer be in the Missouri River, but rather scattered under agricultural farmland stretching from Montana to Missouri.
But when we first initially discussed it, nobody had ever done this before. It was a freshwater excavation in the state of Missouri, and it had never been done. And so we decided, why not us? Nobody else had done it.
I've always worked on my family. I don't really know any other thing to do.
Everybody had a job that they sort of did, and I go to libraries and old museums and old courthouses in Huntsville of old records. Learned a lot about steamboats.
In 1856, a trip on a steamboat from St. Louis to Kansas City was longer and more dangerous than a trip today from Kansas City to the moon.
It's a mighty mo, the Big Muddy. It's quite a river.
Too thick to drink and too thin to plow, the Missouri, the longest river system in North America, was, in the words of one old historian, dead set against being navigated. We were 6 days going from St. Louis to St. Joe, wrote the world's most famous steamboat pilot, Mark Twain. No record is left in my mind concerning it, but a confused jumble of savage-looking snags. Yet, despite the obstacles, the boats kept a-coming, and for good reason. You see, a few years earlier, the United States as we know it ended right here in Kansas City. Beyond was Indian territory. Many passed through it, few stopped. But in 1854, Congress opened wide this great green heart of America, an inland empire the size of France and Germany combined, to settlers from all over America, from all over the world. And during this, the golden age of river travel, many of these settlers, maybe most, came up the mighty Mo. Among the 100 or so steamers on the river in 1856 was the Great White Arabia. Built in Brownsville, Pennsylvania in 1853, the boat had already endured 3 tough years on America's rivers, the average lifespan of a Missouri steamer being but 5. On August of that year, the Arabia steamed out of St. Louis bound for Omaha, Sioux City, and all points in between.
From what we know, people who rode this boat, many of them were women and children coming up the river. The husbands had gone ahead of the families and had made a place for them on the frontier.
How our friends crowded around us at parting, wrote a Kansas-bound Ohio girl. Some cried and talked of Indians and bears. I recall my mother's headaches on the trip and how we longed for journey's end.
They must have been strong, sturdy frontierswomen.
For too long years we've been waiting, away without a way, across the wide Missouri.
For the unlucky souls on the majestic Arabia, the journey would end all too soon.
The boat this size would use up to 32 cords of wood in a 24-hour steaming period. Well, guess where they cut the trees? Along the edge of the banks. And they cut a lot of trees. Well, those snags would die and drift off then into the river as the erosion took over, and that's what was in the river. And they'd all be kind of slanted downstream because the water's taken them downstream. They're like torpedoes. Gauntlet, in other words. It's tough getting up the river. Not bad getting down, but tough getting up the river.
On the evening of September 5th, just beyond Kansas City, where it had stopped for loading, the Arabia headed unknowingly straight towards one of those lethal snags. Passenger Abel D. Kirk explains what happened next. We felt the shock at once, and the boat started sinking. There was a wild scene on board. The boat blipped down till the water came over the deck, and the boat keeled over on one side. The chairs and stools were tumbled about, and many of the children nearly fell into the river. The passengers scrambled to save their children and themselves, and did. But the mule, no one had time to save it or the freight as the Arabia went down.
Over 200 tons of cargo, general merchandise, beautiful dishware, anything and everything that was for sale in 1856. You could say some of it was on this boat, and it all went down.
For Logan, Nebraska, 25% of the cargo was consigned there. Building supplies, warm clothing, boots and shoes and food. And they went without, and they suffered based on the fact that Logan deserted, and they all went across the river to Sioux City.
Lost too, or so they say, were 400 barrels of Kentucky's best bourbon. Sand and silt would bury the Arabia as the Missouri changed its course. But this loss assured that the Arabia, though gone, would never be forgotten.
I really never thought they'd ever find anything, because in the research it said the Arabia had been salvaged.
As they dug deeper and deeper, this worry lingered on. The men knew that in 1897, Dad Henson and the Holt Syndicate claimed to have reached the Arabia's hold, only to find boots and lumber, nothing more.
I thought really they were wasting their time and their money.
On a cold December day, a single discovery would make a believer out of Flo, make a believer out of the world.
And without a question, without a doubt, the best day was the day that the first barrel appeared in front of us.
It was a day that our wives were home, and we immediately, of course, called them to come down to see this great and wonderful thing.
Bob called me about 4 in the afternoon and said, "Come on down, Flo." And I said, "I can't, I've got chili on the stove for supper." And he said in a tone of voice, "Well, shut that stove off and come down." And I realized then that maybe they had found something.
It was a big barrel of beautiful dishes.
And out of that one barrel, they took Freiburg and Cypress and Wedgwood. And we knew in our research that there was Wedgwood on the Arabia. And that was an exciting night.
We got back to my house that morning, about 3:30 in the morning, with 178 beautiful artifacts, all of them different, unique. And now our wives are all talking to us again, they're excited. Can you imagine what it might have been if we'd have found a barrel of boots first? Not too good.
It was the turning point of the excavation, because prior to that we were going to sell everything. But it was the dishes that came out of the ground that day that brought us back together to rethink our whole project. We couldn't sell these, we couldn't break up the collection, it just wasn't going to happen.
From then on, I realized their dream really was going to come true.
And their dream really did come true. One day the Arabia would yield an old musket, so wonderfully preserved it seemed ready to fire. Another day, the wheels of a wagon that seemed just about ready to roll. The next day, a classic Wild West wide-brimmed hat. Then more hats. And presto, still more. One day, frontier-tailored fabric for a mother and a daughter. Another day, frontier-tough tools for a father and a son. The next day, a hand truck, virtually untarnished by time, primed to unload it all. It so happened that on the Arabia dig, each day, every day, was Christmas Day, with gifts for all. One day a present of muddied and mysterious sundries. The next pickles, with hardly a trace of mystery at all. One day a bolt of cloth, carefully handled as always, wonderfully preserved. The next day, powder flask, golden powder flask, helping to provide food for the table and protection for the home. And on many a day, spikes and nails for houses unbuilt and dreams unfulfilled. Secrets all, large and small. Every day, the Arabia yielded its secrets. Secrets gathered from their muddy depths. Secrets resurrected from a premature grave. Secrets to be shared finally with the rest of the world. Secrets so grand that when revealed, they seemed an 1856 Walmart, the single greatest collection of pre-Civil War artifacts in the world.
A miracle of nature, I guess. Things such as perfume and liquor and things like that should have been spoiled and were not. The pickles were good. I tried some of them. They were still fresh and sweet.
Within 4.5 months of starting the dig, the men had removed key parts of the Arabia and all its contents, and the ground was ready for spring planting. The artifacts were stored in the coolers of Jerry Mackey's restaurant, where Greg Hawley guided the preservation and Flo Hawley nurtured the past back to life.
If we had found this Arabia, we couldn't share it with anybody. It wouldn't be much fun.
The beauty of this project is the fact that we've done it with our friends and we've done it with our family.
It was something we had to depend on everybody to do.
The timing was right, the 5 men that came together were right, each of them had their own thing to contribute. Maybe it was meant to be.
We seem to be almost blessed in what we were doing.
It's kind of renewed my faith in the good old American way. It can still be done in America. If you have the desire and the persistence, you can get it done.
For far too long I've been alone. For far too long I've been alone. Without a way, cross the road with you.
Wow, folks, what'd you all think of that video?